My name's Pete Woods, you're watching Hexhamtv. Who are you?
I'm Fran Heathcote, I'm the General Secretary of the Public and Commercial Services Union.
So Fran, I think you've been elected fairly recently. You followed Mark Sawatka. Tell me a little bit about the union.
Okay, so PCS, which is what Public and Commercial Services Union is anybody employed directly by government or whose job would have been a government job had it not been for their work being privatised or outsourced. The CS of PCS is the commercial sector, and those are people that would have traditionally been civil servants. So we represent all different workers in different government departments.
And so I think you're the largest public service union, aren't you?
We're the largest civil service union. Obviously there are big unions like Unison and who organise in the public sector, but PCS is the largest union in the civil service.
So tell me a little bit about yourself then. Why did you join the union?
Well, I joined the DHSS as it was then, back in 1993. I had left school, become a groom, looking after horses, and I needed a casual job to see me through the summer. I applied for a job in the DHSS and eventually got started, not intending to stay. You know, it was very much for me a temporary job, and I intended to go back and be a groom. And 30 years later, I was still there, and largely it was because of PCS as it is now, CPSA as it was then. I went to my first union meeting almost as soon as I started, and they were looking for somebody to be the rep in the office, and somebody pointed at me and said, "She's young and gobby, she'll do it," and I've been there doing that ever since. Yeah.
So you've sort of rose through the ranks over time?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I started off as a workplace rep. It was pretty much before emails were used widely, so every time we got something from the union, we had to run off and photocopy it and hand one out to every person at every desk, and in a way that was a good way of doing things because it got you just talking to everybody, discussing with everybody, and everybody knew what was going on.
So I think your union has a large percentage of women who are members at the moment. Is that right?
We're about 2/3 female. Predominantly female union, but obviously various government departments, various employers within the civil service.
So if you were to sort of say to someone why they ought to consider joining a union, what would you say to them?
Well, you join the union because of its collective strength. So obviously that idea that if we all stick together, if we all stick up for each other, we can make things better. And obviously lots of people join because it's protection at work and making sure if there's ever an issue at work, they've got somebody to look after them. But also with a lot of our campaign activity that's taking place around big issues like pay and pensions and future job security, those are issues where we can make a difference when we all stand together.
So people seem to have a very sort of Marmite view of unions. You know, a lot of people are for them, but a lot of people think, you know, that they cause unnecessary strikes, that it affects the economy. Unions are provocative. What would your response be to that?
I think that's a long way from the truth. I think if you are a member of you work in a workplace that is unionised, it's the union that will negotiate on your pay terms and conditions. Now, obviously, you can go individually to your employer and demand a pay rise or demand change, but the only sure way of having that negotiated is through a trade union. Trade unions are very much about protecting you in the workplace, but looking at the bigger picture as well. All the things that affect you in daily life are, you know, often negotiated for you by trade unions, and certainly in a government employer like the civil service, that is the only way to make improvements to your pay terms and conditions.
And some people are on very low pay, aren't they? Some of the union members.
Yeah, I think there's sometimes a perception about civil servants that they're bowler-hatted bureaucrats that sit around and drink tea and earn a lot of money and don't do very much. But the reality is that our members are relatively low paid, about 40% in receipt of in-work benefits now, like universal credit, because of continued low pay. And the traditional sort of idea of a civil servant being somebody wearing a pinstripe suit and a bowler hat is very far removed from the truth. As I say, predominantly female, predominantly people that earn relatively low rates of pay but do really important jobs to keep the country running.
And what would you say the significance of a union is to a young person, perhaps someone going into their first job or early on in their career?
Yeah, I mean, we do quite a lot of work in PCS with our, what we call our young members network. So the TUC definition of a young member is somebody who's 27 and under. Many people will join the civil service and maybe not have any experience of unions or not know much about them, but we encourage everybody to join, and the best way of getting involved is to meet other people, like-minded people who are doing what you're doing. So there's a big network of young members that campaign together, that work together to try and ensure that they get the best pay terms and conditions. So I think for anybody joining a unionised employer, the first thing to do is to join the union. The union's only ever as strong as the membership that are there. You know, if you've got like 5 or 10% of people in a union, then obviously that's not going to be that effective. But if most people or the majority of people are trade union members, that gives us the ability to collectively engage with the employer on your pay terms and conditions, but also address things when they're not right. So if there's a big feeling in the workplace that perhaps pay isn't good enough, or you know, the not much job security, then that's an issue that the union can take up collectively on your behalf.
And the government have introduced legislation fairly recently that sort of limits protest and perhaps makes it more difficult sometimes to actually get your message across as a union member. What would you say about that?
Yeah, well, we've already got some of the most restrictive legislation in Europe in terms of trade unions. So, you know, the idea that the union convener shouts everybody out and people just walk out the door, that isn't the way things work anymore. In order to take any form of action in terms of a campaign, you need to ballot your members, and the members need to vote for that, or vote by a 50%, at least 50% majority. So in terms of the most recent legislation, so the legislation that the government are trying to bring in now, it's what's called the Minimum Service Level Bill, which demands that the level of service provided on a strike day should be no different to any other day. And of course that's virtually impossible to guarantee, and lots of unions are pushing back against that. So in our union it affects in particular the Home Office or Border Force members, which is one of the areas that the government is targeting with this legislation. We believe that some of what the government is trying to do is illegal, and have currently got a judicial review in place to challenge the government on that particular piece of legislation.
So, if you were to sort of talk about some of the wins that you've had throughout your career, whether it's on an individual basis or sort of, you know, collectively for a group of people, what would you like to highlight as something that the union has been successful in doing? Well,
they're quite varied. So clearly one of the reasons people join a union is for individual representation. So if you've got a problem at work, and certainly one of my big successes when I represented members back in my original workplace was we had the work of typists had just been privatised. There was no recognition with the company that had taken on the typing contract, and our typists suffered from from a repetitive strain injury and was no longer able to do her job. She was a union member, came to me to see if I could help. It was quite a prolonged case, but it led to her getting medically retired and getting the money that she was owed when the company's starting position was that she would get nothing and she'd just resign. So that was a real success for her as an individual, but more collectively we've had lots of successes, whether that's against compulsory redundancies. So until I took up the post of General Secretary, I was employed by the Department for Work and Pensions, and we had not had any compulsory redundancies, but that was as a result of the union being strong and everybody standing together and to try and make sure that everybody was able to be redeployed if their job became at risk. So we had 32 people that were facing compulsory redundancy, but due to the strength of the union, the ability for the union to negotiate on their behalf, all 32 were found alternative employment. So that was quite a big success for collectively. But as I said at the beginning, the CS of PCS is the commercial sector. So those people that would have been civil servants, but their jobs being sold off and privatised. Often they're catering staff, cleaning staff, security staff. Often English isn't their first language. They're predominantly Black and Asian minority workforce. They are, many of them women, many of them with other issues going on outside of work. And many of these companies don't recognise trade unions, but also bid for the contracts on very low pay, very low terms and conditions. So the only way they can then make a profit out of those contracts is by attacking the terms and conditions of the workers that are employed by them. Those workers came together, joined the union and said we want to try and get enough money to have a living wage so that we're not having to do 2 or 3 jobs, so that we can get our sick pay from the time we go sick, and that those basic conditions that lots and lots of people enjoy were things that weren't provided by the company that had won the contract. So as a result of joining the union, they were a really strong bunch of people that stood together, quite brave really when you're in an area that hasn't been unionised. And as a result of their campaign, we were able to get paid sick pay for them, and we were able to get an increase that was in line with the living wage. For the first time, they'd actually succeeded in being a living wage employees. So that was really significant. So often the issues, as I say, are big national issues. So we might have big campaigns around pay, around pensions, and the fact that the government is currently in court because we won a case against the government who were trying to ask everybody to overpay on their pension contributions. The court found that what the government was doing was illegal, but unfortunately the government refused to pay up, and so there's an ongoing campaign within the civil service for fair pensions, for the contribution rate to match the level of pension that those workers are going to receive. There's a living wage campaign around fair pay. Again, you would think as civil servants that you would be relatively well paid, but in April every year tens of thousands of our members have to have an enforced uplift just for the government to stay within the law, because so many have fallen below the minimum wage, and so there's a campaign to try and address that. But also, job security, the idea, again, I think when I joined the civil service, my dad said, civil servant, job for life, but of course it's not like that anymore, and so we try to get an element of job security for our members, which is a strand of the campaign that's really important to workers to ensure they have some job security.
What do you say to those people that say that unions haven't been strident enough in protecting the workforce? That they haven't sort of perhaps I know we've had quite a few strikes of various different workforces recently, but some people would say, well, about time. People's working conditions have been whittled away by privatisation and various things. The unions should have been more strident and out there and sort of supporting the workers more. It's
always a bit of a judgment, isn't it? Because the union, as I say, is only as strong as its workforce, and we need members to be involved in our campaigns. Unlike when I joined the civil service 30 years ago, It's not enough anymore to be cheesed off with what your employer is doing and to just walk out the door. We have to win a ballot, and to do that we have to have membership engagement. But once we're able to win a ballot, so in our case in the civil service we had campaigns over paying pensions last year, where in every government department that beat the 50% threshold, where members voted to take action, we were able to push the government back, and that led to better pay offers, better agreements on job security, and the government had pledged to slash our redundancy terms by 33%, and we were able to push back on that commitment and get a guarantee of redundancy pay for members facing redundancy in the civil service. So that has already saved members hundreds of thousands of pounds that they would have lost had the government been successful. So it's always, there will always be people that say the unions should be doing more, but there will also be people that say, unions are always out on strike, they're always causing trouble. Our job is to negotiate the best for our members. Strike action is the last resort. We don't do that lightly, because of course what people often don't recognise is that it's unpaid and it's a sacrifice for the individual member. And when your members like ours are low paid, it's a big ask to ask people to lose money. But when the government in our case was quite clearly breaking the law in some instances, it was important that our members took a stand, and it was that action that pushed back the government and led to improvements in their terms and conditions. So yeah, you will always get people that say, why isn't the union doing more? But largely it will be down to how much we can do. What we have seen in the last 12 months, as you say, are a number of different unions standing together and challenging what's being done. So we've seen teachers, we've seen rail workers, we've seen junior doctors, we've seen health workers, civil servants, all standing together and telling this government that enough is enough.
Now, the polls currently indicate that it's likely we may have a Labour government in future. We don't know whether that's going to take place, but it certainly looks that way.
Yeah.
What would the approach of your union be to a Labour administration?
Well, we're not affiliated to the Labour Party, mainly because whoever is in government becomes our employer, and whenever there's been a debate around Labour Party affiliation, that's always been soundingly lost when it's put to members, because you wouldn't want to be paying money directly to your employer. But what we would like to do is sit down with any incoming government to set out very clearly what our demands are. So what's taking place at the moment, as you say, there's an indication that we may well have a Labour government later in 2024. So we need to make clear to Keir Starmer and his friends, what would be our demands, what is it that we would want to see from any incoming government, be that Labour, Conservative or anybody else. So there are a number of discussions taking place at the moment. The Labour Party have produced what they're calling a new deal for working people, and that sets out what they would be prepared to do and some of the things that they would be prepared to change in their first 100 days of taking up office if they're successful. But the role of unions and our union members is to hold the Labour government, if it comes in, to those commitments. If we don't get a Labour government and we have another Conservative dominated government, then that will be a whole new set of challenges that we'll have to make very clear demands about. But clearly, the government we've got hasn't been good for our members, and it's led to a lot of attacks in terms of their working conditions, their pay, their pensions, and their redundancy terms. So you name it, this government has sort of gone for civil servants. It's quite easy to attack the civil service. They're not a profession that attracts a lot of public sympathy. They're not seen as a caring profession like nurses, or a profession, often they're sort of rubbished by the government and rubbished by the media. But the reality is, as I say, they do pretty important jobs to keep the country running, often low paid, often undervalued, and it's our job to try and make sure that we get the best deal for them.
Now, women are sort of underrepresented in terms of senior union leaders. What would you say to a young person who's perhaps in a union, a young woman about getting involved and
Yeah.
actually trying to become a union rep or learning new skills through doing that process?
I would say do that, but clearly you'd expect me to. I think things are changing. What we're seeing over the last couple of years are a number of new union leaders, women leaders. There are a number of general secretaries, obviously including myself now, who are women. A lot of it comes down to like recruiting like. So if you see other women doing these things, you think, actually, maybe I could do that as well. I was lucky. I was mentored and encouraged by a lot of very good reps, male and female. You know, there are lots of supportive male reps that helped me and sort of trained me as I got more involved. But I was incredibly lucky that I was president of the PCS before I was general secretary, and my predecessor as president was somebody who gave me a lot of help and support, and seeing another woman doing those things gave me the confidence to think that I could maybe do them too. And you know, it doesn't happen overnight with me. I started at the very bottom. I was a workplace rep in a local office, but gradually got more involved and you know, met other people, often women that were doing the same thing, and that we give each other encouragement. There are women's networks, there are equality networks that people can get involved in, which tackle underrepresentation. But at the end of the day, the best way of taking on more responsibility is just to get involved. Just, you know, anybody can join a union, and we encourage people to do that. But the more active you are in the union, the more involved you are, you know, whether that's as a rep or just as an active member who turns up to the meetings and votes when they get a ballot paper. All of those things are really, really important. And what we need is a network of active people that want the union to succeed. And if we all play our part in that, then we're going to be stronger and we're going to be better and we're going to win more. So I would say to any young person, you know, male or female, but in particular if I was talking to a young woman, that the only way to change things, if you know, look at your pay, look at your terms and conditions, look at your job security, and if you think any of that isn't good enough, the way to change it is to join a union and get involved. You can be as unhappy with your pay terms and conditions as you like, but the only way of actually being able to change things is that collective power that comes by being a union member.
So Fran, you're at the start of probably at least a 5-year term of office. What would you see as success at the end of 5 years for you and for your union?
I mean, none of us have a crystal ball, and there's loads of issues that are facing us right now, you know, whether that's government policy, in our case around social security, immigration, the Rwanda bill, some of those wider issues, or whether it's the basic pay, pensions, terms and conditions, job security. Our job, or my job really, is to lead a union that puts itself in the best position to be able to campaign on some of those issues. So the way to do that is to make sure lots of people join the union, that we recruit new people, that we've got those young people coming through, because they often say to young workers, you know, you're the activists of tomorrow, but they're not really, they're the activists of today, and we want their input and we want everybody's involvement. That's what makes a strong union. So I think a measure of success would be that we have managed to protect some of our members' pay terms and conditions, but also in where it's possible that we've been able to make gains and improvements. Excuse me. We don't win on everything, you know, we don't win every campaign that we lead, but as a result of being a union member, you're stronger, you're protected, and we do make gains. You know, our sort of ethos really is that campaigning works and action gets results. I think it was the late Bob Crow that said, you know, if you fight, there's no guarantee that you'll win, but if you don't fight, you will surely lose. And I think that's something to remember, really, standing up for ourselves, sticking together, being part of a collective organisation that's aimed at improving your pay terms and conditions is probably one of the best and most sort of productive things you can do, really, if you want to make change for the good.
Fran Heathcote, thank you very much for talking to Hexhamtv.
Thanks so much.